Every Friday before the range opens, the janitor erases the record board himself, by hand, and no one has ever seen him let another soul touch the chalk. "Look at him over there," said the first instructor, chin lifting toward the far wall, where a stooped man in gray coveralls dragged a push broom in slow arcs beneath the board. "Been at it since I made rank. You think he's ever once read what's written up there?" The second one laughed without much behind it, the kind of laugh two young men share to fill a room. "He probably doesn't even know whose name he's dusting around. 44 years on that board, and I'd bet money the old man thinks it's just numbers." 2,111 yards. That was the figure chalked at the top of the board, untouched since before either of them had been born, the longest verified hit in the school's history, older than the digital log, older than the range's asphalt, older, it seemed, than anyone left to explain it. In 4 days, a visiting dignitary would stand under that number for a demonstration the whole command had been rehearsing for a month. Nobody in the room that morning knew the mechanism that connected the broom to the board, the coveralls to the crest, the old man's bad shoulder to a shot fired before the drywall behind him had ever been hung. They only knew the number, and the sweeping, and the joke that came easy because the janitor never once looked up to answer it. If you've ever watched someone erase their own name so quietly that nobody thought to ask why, you already know how this ends. He swept on. The brass casings clicked ahead of the bristles like something counting itself. Down the room, a rack of gleaming rifles waited under glass, and past that, the firing line ran out through open bay doors toward berms a half-mile off, brown and quiet in the early light. None of it belonged to the young men laughing by the chalk line. All of it, in ways neither of them would understand for 4 more days, still belonged to him. Emmett Fenno wore his coveralls the way another man might wear a uniform he'd stopped being issued but never stopped ironing. Gray, government plain, sleeves rolled once at each forearm, a ball cap gone soft with washing and stripped of whatever patch had once told the world which outfit he belonged to. He was 78 years old and moved like a man conserving something, not because he was frail, but because he had long since decided which motions were worth making. His right shoulder would not lift past his own chest. He had stopped fighting it years ago. When a rag or a broom needed to cross that side of his body, he did not reach. He turned, feet first, the whole trunk of him pivoting like a gun on a fixed mount, and by now, the range had absorbed that turn into its furniture the way it had absorbed the hum of the ventilation fans. Present, unremarked, load-bearing. He swept the same path every morning, firing line first, brass into the bin, then the observation benches, then the long wall beneath the record board. Last of all. He never rushed the last part. On 5 days of the week, he ran a rag over the frame and left the numbers alone. On Fridays, he did something else. He came in before the doors opened, before Simone Cobbs logged the first round of the day, and he erased the board by hand, not with the department rag hanging on its nail, but with his own palm, slow strokes, the chalk dust catching in the calluses, the way flour catches in a baker's knuckles. Then he re-chalked it, letter by letter, number by number, in a hand steadier than his shoulder had any right to allow, and put the chalk back exactly where the ledge wanted it. No one had ever seen him let another soul touch that board. Not the rag, not the checklist item stapled beside the door that read, "Weekly, white board, confirm data current." He confirmed nothing on paper. He confirmed it with his hand. In the left breast pocket of the coveralls, worn nearly through at the fold, wrote a single yellowed card, corners gone soft as cloth, filled edge to edge in decades-old grease pencil, windholds, elevation clicks, a column of numbers that meant nothing to anyone who glanced at it and had never once, in all the years anyone at Sable Ridge had known him, left his pocket in daylight. Nolan Prescott was, by any measure that mattered on a firing line, exactly what his badge said he was. That morning he lay prone at the 1,000-yard bench with Simone Cobbs beside him, calling wind off 3 flags and a mirage line only she seemed able to read clearly, and he put 5 rounds into a group you could have covered with a coffee lid, at a distance where most men needed the luck of the atmosphere to cooperate. Simone logged the group size, whistled once, low, and said nothing else, because there was nothing else worth saying. He came off the mat already talking, the way men do when the body is still running hot and the mouth catches up to it, tapping the laminated card clipped inside his range binder, his own personal best data, a shot he'd taped to the wall in his head before ever taping it to a wall in the room, against his open palm like a man keeping time with something. "That's how you chase a record," he said to the trainees clustered behind the bench, "not with legacy noise, with data you can defend." He was still glowing from it when he clocked the shape at the far wall, the same gray coveralls, the same slow turn, lingering a beat too long near the chalk ledge under the 2111. Prescott straightened, grinned for the room the way a man grins when he already knows the room is his. "Hey, old-timer." He said it loud enough to carry, pitched for the trainees the way a joke is pitched for an audience it expects to laugh. "You dust that number every day. You even know whose name goes with it?" A ripple went through the group, half amusement, half the discomfort of watching someone kick at something already down. Emmett did not turn his shoulders toward him. He turned his whole body, the way he always did, and looked at Prescott across 40 feet of polished concrete with an expression that gave up exactly nothing. "No," Emmett said. "Do you?" It landed wrong for Prescott, a beat too flat to be funny and too plain to argue with, and the laugh that had been building in the room came out thinner than he wanted. He came back at it twice more before the morning was through, needling, testing for a soft spot the way a man taps a wall for a stud. The first time he asked Emmett to define a full-value wind in front of 4 trainees, expecting silence or fumbling, and got instead a description so plain and so correct that one of the younger men laughed anyway, not at the answer, but at the absurdity of a janitor giving it, and Prescott waved the laugh off like static. The second time he asked what a come-up was, sharper now, and Emmett said only, "The clicks you dial to make the bullet agree with gravity," and went back to his broom before anyone could decide whether to laugh again. Simone Cobbs did not laugh either time. She had logged 3 years of trainees standing at parade rest waiting on instructors, and she watched Emmett Fenno stand the same way while he answered, weight even, spine long, hands loose at the seams of the coveralls, a stillness in it that had nothing to do with a man who spent his mornings pushing a broom. She filed it away without comment. The way she filed wind calls she wasn't sure of yet, waiting for enough data to trust the pattern. The third time, Prescott didn't ask a question. He set a challenge in front of the room instead, chalk already loose in his own fingers. "You want to earn your keep under that board," he said. "Tell me the record, distance, wind call, right now." He said it with the ease of a man who has never once been wrong in front of an audience, tapping his laminated card twice against his palm before tucking it away, as if the gesture itself were an answer he expected no one to match. Emmett set the broom against the wall. He crossed the concrete in that turned, deliberate walk, took the chalk from the ledge where his own hand had set it every Friday for longer than Prescott had been alive, and wrote without pausing to think, 2,111 yards, and beneath it a wind call in numbers so exact they might have been read off an instrument rather than a memory 44 years deep. He set the chalk down parallel to the ledge, the way a man signs a form he's already stood behind. Then he picked the broom back up and walked toward the door. Nobody in the room said anything for the length of time it takes a held breath to become uncomfortable. Prescott's mouth was still open on a comeback that had nowhere left to go, and the mystery of why he would erase that number every Friday with his own bare hand rather than let a rag or a checklist do it stood exactly as unanswered as it had been an hour before. Simone found the ledger 2 days later, the bound one kept in the historical office, not the chalkboard everyone actually looked at. The entry for the long-range record wasn't a name. It was 2 initials, EF, typed flat by whatever contractor had digitized the range's paper files decades back, and beside it, in a second hand, smaller and rounder than any official log entry had a right to be, a single line of notation about wind conditions that read less like a record and more like someone taking careful dictation from a man whose own handwriting had never been steady enough to trust with numbers that mattered. She sat with it a long time before she brought it to anyone. Prescott, for his part, was not sleeping well. He told himself it was the promotion riding on Friday, the visiting dignitary, the record he still meant to break on camera and hang his own name beneath. But some nights it was the janitor's chalk, set down parallel to the ledge, that kept circling back. He did something that week he would later have trouble explaining to himself in plain terms, At the firing point, on the card taped up for wind reference, he changed a single figure quietly, meaning only to have it ready in his pocket in case the old man was ever fool enough to be asked to repeat himself in front of the visitor. It was not, he told himself, a lie so much as an insurance policy. He also placed 2 calls that week to the base historical office, using the words unverifiable and pre-digital and legacy noise, suggesting gently that Friday's records purge might as well take the old EF entry along with the rest of the paper nobody could stand behind anymore. Simone tried once to get Emmett to let her pull the full original folder behind that ledger page. He said no, in the same plain voice he used for everything, and when she pressed, gently, he only said that some of what was in that folder wasn't his to hand around. He didn't tell her whose hand had written the smaller notation. He didn't tell her that folder held the last thing in the entire base archive still written by his wife. Prescott's rehearsal the next morning went wrong in a way that had nothing to do with his rifle and everything to do with the card in his own pocket. He read the wind off the false figure he'd taped up himself, dialed his hold to match it, and put a shot into the berm 11 inches short at 900 yards. A miss that would have been laughable from a trainee, and was, from him, something closer to alarming. Simone called the actual wind a half-second after his shot broke, too late to matter, her voice flat with the particular unease of watching a number not agree with the world. He had 3 days left before the visitor arrived and no clean rehearsal left to spend. The range time bled out from underneath him by a lie he'd told a strip of laminated cardstock. He was still red-faced over the log sheet when a staff car came up the gravel a full day earlier than the schedule called for, and a broad-shouldered man in his mid-60s stepped out in a service uniform, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who has stopped needing to prove anything to a room. Colonel Tobias Harrington had asked, months before any of this, purely for himself, to finally see the ridge where he'd served as a young spotter 44 years back, on his own time, unconnected to any promotion or demonstration. He came through the bay doors already extending a hand toward Prescott, already 3 words into a prepared greeting about honored to finally see your facility, when his eyes crossed the room and found the stooped man in gray coveralls leaning a push broom against the far wall. Harrington's hand stayed half raised. The rest of the sentence simply did not come. He did not salute. He did not call anyone to attention. He crossed the floor instead in long, unhurried strides, past Prescott, past Simone, past 4 trainees who had no idea what they were watching, and set down on the observation bench a battered olive folder he had carried in from the car without anyone noticing he was carrying it. A mission log, government stock, edges gone soft the same way the dope sheet in Emmett's pocket had gone soft, as if both men had spent 44 years handling paper the same careful way. Harrington did not speak first. He looked at Emmett Finot the way a man looks at a debt he has never once forgotten and never once been given the chance to pay, and it was Emmett who finally said his name. Plain, no rank attached, the way you'd greet a man you'd once shared a hillside with in weather neither of you talked about afterward. There was a ridge, Harrington said at last, to the room more than to Emmett, his voice steady but slower than a man giving a prepared remark, where the wind came up the draw wrong for 11 hours straight, and a young spotter under this man's charge nearly walked himself off a shelf of ice reading it backward. He didn't, because this man called him off it before he took the second step. He rested one hand flat on the folder without opening it, an old habit finished before he decided to make it. 44 years, and I finally had a reason to come see where the shot on that board came from. I did not expect to find the man who fired it still holding a broom. The historical office had scheduled its purge for that same Friday morning, and Simone, having run the whole week on instinct rather than permission, had pulled the original folder out from under the shredding cart an hour before anyone official arrived to authorize its destruction. She laid it open now on the bench beside Harrington's log, the 2 documents from the same season sitting side by side for the first time in 4 decades. The smaller, rounder hand beside the wind notation was not a clerk's. It was a wife's. 30 years of her husband's rough columns transcribed clean because his own hand, even then, had never been steady enough for numbers that had to survive him. Prescott read it over Simone's shoulder without asking permission, and something in his face went the particular gray of a man watching his own certainty rearrange itself into an entirely different shape. I asked them to strike this, he said, to no one, to the folder, to the smaller handwriting he now understood he had nearly signed away along with the record. He didn't apologize in words. He took the folder himself that same afternoon to the base bindery, paid for the archival sleeving out of his own pocket, and sat at a long table turning each brittle page into its clear protective jacket with the same unhurried care Simone had once watched Emmett give the chalk ledge, as if some lessons only transmit through the hands. He didn't clean the board because it needed cleaning. He cleaned it because her handwriting was still under the chalk, and chalk is the only thing he's ever been allowed to put over it. Months later, the range still opened the same way it always had, brass ticking under the same broom, the ventilation fans humming their same low argument with the morning air. The bound ledger in the historical office now read, Fenno, Emmett, 2,111 yards, in full, the EF corrected in ink, by a hand that had learned, slowly, to be careful with things that weren't its own. The chalkboard on the wall still carried only the number, no name beneath it, because when Colonel Harrington had offered, gently, to have it lettered properly, Emmett had said no, the same plain no he gave most things, and no one who understood what that folder held argued with him twice. Prescott had changed one habit that anyone could see, and it was smaller than a speech and worth more than one. Every wind card at every firing point now got read aloud by a second set of eyes before a shot was dialed. His own hand no longer trusted alone with a number that mattered. He never explained why to the trainees. He didn't have to. They watched him do it, the way you watch a man keep a promise he never announced making. On a Friday like any other, Emmett came in before the doors opened, palm against the chalk dust, letter by letter setting the same figures he had set every week for longer than most of the men on that range had been alive. When he finished, he drew the dope sheet from his breast pocket, the same soft-cornered card he had carried since before the drywall behind the board had ever been hung, and refolded it along creases worn so deep the paper barely remembered being flat. He slid it back into the coverall pocket, worn nearly through at the fold, and picked the push-broom back up from where he'd leaned it against the wall, and went on sweeping brass toward the bin beneath the record board, now correctly chalked, as the range emptied out into ordinary evening. Some records aren't kept in binders. They're kept in the hands of the one person still willing to do the sweeping.